How's it going, guys? My name is Chase Farrow, and it is actually, I think it's actually snowing here in Texas. It's really cold, but that's okay, because today we're going to be swapping these for these. Now, real quick, before we jump straight in, we're going to do a little bit of myth busting on big brakes and why/when you should be doing them in the first place. One of the biggest myths about upgrading and improving the braking on your car is that if you just throw bigger brakes on there, it'll be better. And that's just objectively untrue. In fact, if you're thinking about, should I upgrade the brakes on my car? If you've got a C5 Z06 or even a C5 base and all you do is drive it on the street, maybe do a little bit of canyon carving or something like that, you don't need a big brake kit. You can actually improve your braking for way less money. So the first place you should start is your tires. Yes, your tires. If you're running cheapo all seasons, your tires are going to absolutely 100% be the limitation of your braking, not your actual calipers or discs or brake system in general. If your tires aren't the limitation, or maybe it's not a braking force thing, maybe it's you're finding that when you do some spirited driving, your pedal is getting squishy and you're experiencing brake fade. There's a couple of things you can do to combat that without spending thousands of dollars on a big brake kit. The first thing is flush your brake fluid. It's probably collected a bunch of moisture because it's old. The other thing is that you're probably using DOT3 fluid. Now, DOT3 fluid is the standard for passenger cars on the road. However, DOT3 doesn't have as high of a boiling point as, say, like DOT4 or DOT5. The reason that matters is because as you're braking, your brakes heat up. The fluid that goes through the calipers also gets hot, and once it starts to boil, it starts to turn into a gas inside of the lines, and you all of a sudden start losing pressure inside the lines, and as a result, less braking force. So you want to go to a higher boiling point for your braking fluid. Now, the downside to a DOT4 versus a DOT3 is it is a bit more high maintenance. It tends to collect moisture more, or DOT4s tend to collect moisture more, and so I usually recommend bleeding those as frequently as once every year to about once every 18 to maybe 24 months on the high end. Now, the next one is swap out your brake lines for steel lines. Again, going back to the fluid, as it heats up, the rubber hosing will start to expand, and as the diameter of the hose gets larger from the expansion, you lose brake pressure. So obviously that's bad. Now, the final thing that I recommend doing is upgrading your pads. The actual bite of your brakes is determined not by your caliper so much, and not at all by the size of your disc, but by your pads. Now, what I've got here is a set of R1 Concepts Performance Sport Series. They are a high friction street performance track and off-roading. That is French, I can't read French. But basically, these are a pretty aggressive but still very streetable pad. This is going to be their bitiest compound or their bitiest brake pad until you get into their track day line. And so this is what I'm going to be using for my regular street driving. And then another thing you can do is, if you do like autocrossing or you do like road coursing, you can pick up some track day pads like EBC Reds, EBC Yellows, or even R1 Concepts track day pads. And then just swap out your pads before you go to do your autocrossing. When you get home, put your street pads back on and you're good to go. Now, it's important to understand when it's appropriate to go to a larger, more robust braking kit. And in order to do that, we need to understand what exactly is happening when you're braking. What is the science, or what are the physics of braking? So basically what's happening whenever you're on a track and you're going into a corner and you press the brakes, what you're doing is you're saying, I have a whole bunch of kinetic energy and I need to get rid of it really fast. Well, energy can't just be destroyed. It can't just disappear. It has to go somewhere. Well, what you can do, and this is what the brakes do, you can take that huge amount of kinetic energy that you have and you can convert it to thermal energy. Now, that thermal energy then gets stored in the brake disc, and then over a period of time is dispersed through as radiant heat. Now, what does this have to do with big brakes? Well, A larger brake disc is beneficial because yes, it can increase the contact patch, like basically the size of the pad that you can run. But the other benefit to a larger disc is because there's more material, it can store more thermal energy. So now that I've bored you all with the science of braking, now we can get into the fun part, the reason you're all here, installing our new brake kit. All right, we're here and I've already got the brake off. I didn't show that because it's just 2 bolts on the back of the caliper to release it, and the camera wouldn't have been able to see that with the caliper on anyway. So I went ahead and did that. You might also notice that I've got 2 studs that don't look like the others. I started preemptively doing something and then I thought you guys might be interested in this. So the reason I've got 2 longer studs, the reason I've got 2 studs that don't look like the other 3 is because I'm going to be running a 5mm spacer up front just to artificially give my wheels a little bit more poke, very little, but just a tiniest little bit. And if you want to run a spacer on a C5 Corvette, whether it's front or rear, you have to run extended wheel studs. There is not enough threads in order to accommodate a spacer. You might be able to get it threaded, it's going to be a real pain, but it's not going to thread very far and it's not safe. You really can't do that. Now, if you wanted to put longer studs on your car so you can run a spacer, there's one of 2 ways you can do it. You can go on Google and you can search C5 Corvette extended wheel studs, and you can spend $80 to $100 on a set of 20 wheel studs for your car, or you can do what I did, and that is I was sitting there thinking it's an M12 by 1.5, which that's the thread pitch of the factory studs. That's a super common thread pitch. So I figured there's got to be other cars that have longer wheel studs on them that are also M12 by 1.5. So the trick is just finding one that has the same knurl and head spacing. And as it turns out, the 2020 Chevy Spark has the same knurl and head spacing. It's a slightly longer stud, and as you can tell, not only is it a little bit longer, but it's threaded all the way to the end. And there, it was like 20 bucks roundabout for a set of 10, so 40 bucks for all 4 corners, and they're readily available. Pretty much every AutoZone and O'Reilly's will carry them, so they'll work perfectly fine and they will suit our needs. So I'm going to hammer these out. Basically the way you need to do it is you need to hammer out on this side, because this is kind of the only space that they can go through, and then you can pull the new ones through. So we'll do that real quick. Just like that, longer studs. I do recommend using obviously a open-ended lug nut, and use one that's old that you're going to be replacing, because that's really going to eat up the end of it. So just use an old one that's obviously not been cross-threaded, but that you plan on replacing. And now, long studs. All right, so now that we're done with the studs, now we can get the brake line off the back of the caliper. Now, this is a 1/2 inch. Be aware though, as soon as you take it off, you're gonna have brake fluid come out. So have like a pan or something like that that it can drain into, and don't let it get on your floor, especially if it's epoxied, because if you have an epoxied floor, brake fluid will eat it. So don't let it do that. So now we can turn our attention to this guy. We're gonna break the hard line loose. It's a I think a 1/2 inch. It's a 1/2 inch. On your car, this has probably never been broken loose, so it's probably really gonna suck. Just a heads up. If I can even get mine on there. I got the initial turn, so we'll just take the bracket off now. Make sure you don't lose that 10mm bolt like I just did. Found it. I should now be able to get this off. Yeah. All right, so now that we've got that off, we do have to reuse this bracket because we are swapping over to some StopTech steel braided brake lines. This is an example of what I was talking about before. This is a mod that you can do way cheap that is going to massively improve the brake feel and the performance of your brakes overall. However, we do have to use this bracket. These StopTech brake lines were about $150, I want to say, for all 4 corners. However, you do have to reuse this bracket, so we need to punch this clip off of here. So basically what I'll do is I will take my screwdriver, basically just kind of wedge it in there, and then I'm going to take the hammer and I'm going to get this thing to start popping off. This thing's been on this brake line for a little over 20 years, so it's not going to come off without a fight. You're really going to have to whack it a few times. It's like 30 degrees or 35 degrees and pouring outside. It is so cold. You can probably see my breath in front of the camera. Oh man. Well, it's off. It's in Narnia now though.
A little longer than a few minutes later.
It was on the opposite side of my garage. So once that clip is off, put the new brake line through the end there, and then should be easier to get back on. And you're basically just gonna hammer it, and then your new steel line is ready to go back on. But what I'm gonna do first is I'm going to put the line on the caliper. All right, so if you've never installed pads into an opposing piston caliper with like a pin and clip style retainer, basically what you're gonna do, well, first we're gonna start with this one, get that one just in there. We're gonna take this one. Oh geez. Ideally, you should try to avoid touching the pads with your bare hands, but unfortunately, my bare hands are cleaner than my gloves are at the moment, so. Okay, so we're gonna do it real quick. Take a napkin here. I'm gonna hammer this pin in real quick. I recommend using like a rag or something like that just to avoid any metal on metal contact with your nice paint. Now, go ahead and put this clip on. Now this really is gonna have to bend a bit when this pin goes through. There. Oh, there we go. Okay, cool. I did just barely nick it, but you should, this is what the pins should look like as they poke through, if y'all can see this. So that is in. So now what we're gonna do is we are going to get the brake line on here. Brake line's gonna go on like this. So now what we got here is a C6Z06 spec 14-inch disc. This was supplied to me by R1 Concepts. You can go through, you can get the AC Delco Black Hat or AC Delco Gold, whatever it's called, but this is going to be our disc up here on the front. So we're gonna go ahead and get this guy on there, and we're gonna be careful not to touch the front surface of it with our bare hands. Man, it is so cold. This is not fun. All right, now we're gonna use our nice, fresh new caliper bolts to put our nice new fresh caliper on. So we're gonna be real careful sliding this thing on there. There we go. I got that first one on there, but one of the things I am gonna do, a couple of guys were talking about needing to basically run a spacer on not this side, but basically like a 1mm washer, not on this side, but on this side, to keep the back of the caliper bolt from contacting the back of the disc. I don't know if that's 100% necessary, but I did it on the other side. I'm gonna go ahead and do it on this side too. And then will be installed. All right, so that one's through. I'm gonna go ahead and pull this guy out and slide the little washer in on the top. I wish there was a practical way for you guys to kind of see what I'm doing here, but there really isn't. Nice. Pads are just dragging a little bit, but that's to be expected. These look so good already. Okay. If you look here, there is only the absolute tiniest bit of clearance, but it's perfect. All right, so now that we got the caliper all mounted up, now we can get these lines joined together. All right, cool, so that's there. Now I just need to get the bolt back in for the bracket. Okay, cool. Okay. You definitely want to make sure you got this good and tight. It's a little bit annoying, but it's important apparently. That's what I've been told. Alright. So those should be plenty tight now. Now we can go ahead, we can get the wheel on. So let me grab the spacer, get this thing on, see how it looks. Also, if you're gonna run a spacer, make sure it's a hub-centric spacer. So a lot of times when people think hub-centric spacers, they think like a 1 to 2 inch spacer that has its own studs. That's not exclusively true. Hub-centric just means that the center bore of the spacer actually matches the center bore of your hub. So always make sure you're running a hub-centric spacer. Now, one thing I want to note, since I'm putting the wheels on and I'm thinking about it, is that these do clear, obviously, my 18-inch wheels. I could have run these wheels on this caliper without the spacer. That's not why it's there. That's an aesthetic choice on my end. However, that doesn't mean that every single 18-inch wheel will clear these calipers. Most of them should. I'm pretty confident that pretty much all of them will. But it is possible that your wheel maybe will have a different barrel depth than my Apex EC7s, because Apex makes the EC7s as a track-centric wheel. They're a race wheel, and as a result, they've got quite a bit of headroom inside the barrel to accommodate large calipers and large brake setups. It is possible if you're running some kind of rep wheel, like a like you've got C6Z06 replica wheels or something like that, Grand Sport replica wheels, if they're 18s, that doesn't mean it will clear 100%. It probably will, but I wanted you to be aware of that in case you decide to do that. That way you don't have any surprises. It's on though. I am very pleased. I think these things look fantastic. And now we can move to the rear. All right, so back here, we've got probably the most annoying part of this whole process, the e-brake. So I figured since I've got all this stupid stuff off here, I might as well go ahead and replace this parking brake shoe, because as you can see, I mean, this thing's done. So we're gonna go ahead and pop that off. Basically, with the e-brake released, it shouldn't be terribly difficult to pop off of here. So you got that, and then inside you got the little retainer spring. So getting that off, pretty easy. Getting the new one on, that sucks. I've got the new parking brake shoe. It goes on exactly as the old one came off. The pain is this thing. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna show you a quick trick that I actually saw from a guy on YouTube named, I think, Don McNeely. He used a string. I'm gonna use a zip tie. So hold on. All right, so we have the new brake shoe. Pretty simple. It goes on the same way that the old one came off. The thing that's a pain is this. This is the retention spring. So this has to go inside the brake shoe, and it has to slot into these little clips, and it's a real pain. But I'm actually going to show you a trick that I found from another gentleman here on YouTube. I believe his name was Don McNeely. Now he used string. I'm going to use zip tie, but basically what's going to happen here is this spring needs to go inside of the brake shoe. This point needs to be lined up here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use zip tie like this, if I can feed it through. And I'm going to use the zip tie to basically hold it more or less in place and keep it from escaping. Because then once it's, there we go. Then once it's on there, I have to use a pick to feed these stupid little things into those slots. Getting it back on the plunger is relatively easy. Well, it's supposed to be relatively easy. Alright, so that's more or less on there. But now, in that tiny little crack, I have to get the retainer spring slotted in there. So unfortunately, you're not going to be able to see that. So I'm just going to set the camera up. I'm going to spend probably the next half hour trying to get that to work, and I'm going to be yelling a lot. So, yeah. All right, so after a huge amount of frustration, it's on. Now, it's not abnormal if you put your brake disc on and it's like really tight and it doesn't want to turn. If you can turn it by hand, it's fine. Drive it a little bit and it'll self-clearance. So yeah, that's that. But I'm gonna go ahead and get this brake line off up here, and we're gonna keep plugging along with getting this rear brakes on. Now what I am doing real quick is I'm gonna put this bracket on there just to hold the caliper in place, because that up there is going to be a bit of a pain. Why is that not threading? All right, so now that the brake lines are all secured, everything's ready there. Now we can go ahead and put our R1 Concepts brake disc on there. And as you can see, like I had said before, that's gonna be real tight, but I was able to spin it with my hands a bit, which means that we'll basically just have to let it self-clearance. That'll free up after a pretty short amount of driving. So this is all J55, so this is what you would find on the C6Z51 package. I didn't want to just go big on the front brakes and then leave the dinky little rear brakes on there. But one of the things you do want to be careful with is you don't want to oversize your rear brakes, because early C5 Corvettes use a brake bias spring, and you can really kind of accidentally screw yourself over by going too big on the rear brakes, or too aggressive on the rear brakes rather. I think from 2001 and up, I'm pretty sure that the EBCM is what controls all the bias and everything, so it's not too big of a deal. But there's really no sense in going too big on the rear with the caliper, at least, because, well, first of all, you can really piss off your ABS. But the other thing is that you'll find that under heavy braking, if you're on track, the rear end of the car will kind of dance around, or you'll get rear lockups, and obviously that's not what you want. So we're going with the J55s on the rear. I painted them to match the fronts, and we're ready to get them installed. All right, there we go. Got a little bit more meat on those rears. I know that the rear J55 discs are actually a little bit bigger than the factory C5 Corvette front discs, so that'll be good to have that little bit of extra meat there. So a few weeks have passed since I filmed the install. I was editing the video, and I kind of felt like it'd be a little bit lame to leave it off like that, where it's just like throw them on and then that's it. Don't talk about it, don't drive it. And I pride myself in being a person who actually uses their car. My car's not a garage queen, as I've said many times before. I drive it, I track it, I take it on long trips and stuff like that. And so I felt like it'd be a little bit lame if I just ended it off there and I didn't drive it a bit, and give you guys my impressions of the brakes now that they're on. I've had a little bit of time to break them in, and maybe help you decide whether or not this is actually a good mod for you, and if it's something that you should actually invest in doing. So I figured what I would do, since I need to go take the car to get cleaned up, is I would go take it out on some of the beautiful back roads that we have around here. I've got a GoPro head mount. I figured I would throw it on there, give you guys a little bit of a POV drive of my car, while also talking about the brakes, kind of giving some of my feedback on them, but also talking about the cooling ducts that I did in the last video, because I've been getting a lot of questions about both the cooling ducts and my brakes. So what we're gonna do then is we're gonna put some gas in the car, and then we're gonna go do some driving. All right, so right off the bat, I didn't go super hard on this spirited drive because, as you can see, the road conditions are not the absolute greatest anymore. It sucks because Ida Road used to be such an incredible road to drive, but over the years the surface has really deteriorated, and as you can see with all the the black patches in the road, that's where the rocks that were originally mixed in with the asphalt have over the years just been peeled away and torn away from people driving on it, but also from water, rain, freezing, all that stuff. So you want to make sure at all times when you go on your spirited drives, never outdrive your grip, never outdrive your brakes, and never outdrive your talent. Also, whenever you're doing your spirited drives, don't apex blind corners. It's fun to use the entire road, but only do it when you have a clear line of sight of what's coming up. Unfortunately, over the years, Ida Road and roads like it have claimed many, many lives, and it's usually because of drivers and motorcyclists doing things like that. That being said, I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna rip off the disappointment band-aid and tell you guys that it doesn't really feel all that different, to be honest. The big difference that you're going to feel is mostly going to be in flushing your old brake fluid and moving to a bitier pad. This is the exact same type of pad that I was running on my previous brake setup, and so the bite doesn't really feel significantly different. And again, through the size and all of that stuff, you're not really gaining a whole lot of braking force there. Now, you might be wondering, because I've said now multiple times throughout this video that there are cheaper ways that you could upgrade your brakes, why did I do this? Well, a couple of reasons. One of them was the cost was really, really low for me. This is a budget brake kit to begin with, but the cost for me was really, really low because fortunately R1 Concepts came on board and helped by supplying me with pads and discs to do this. So all I had to pay for was the calipers, the brake lines, and the fluid. And as I've said in the past, I try to be really transparent when I'm doing my videos about sponsorships and stuff like that, because I don't want to give people an unrealistic expectation of modding your car that a lot of people on YouTube do, where it seems like they're building like these incredible, crazy, expensive builds and they're doing it in such a short amount of time. And it kind of makes you feel as though if you can't afford to, do a $60,000 build in 2 weeks, then you can't afford to do the car stuff, and that's just not true. Like I said, I just wanted to be transparent about that. The other reason that I went ahead and I did this mod is because over the next couple of years, I'm trying to really ramp up the amount of road course racing that I'm doing. So I'm going to be trying to attend Super Lap Battle, Grid Life, and just general time attack stuff. And that's where bigger brake kits tend to shine. Like I mentioned earlier in the video, the more material you have, the more thermal energy that you can store whenever you're doing your braking. That really comes to life, and that's really helpful when you're doing back-to-back hot laps. If you're just going out on an autocross course where you're doing like these 30 to 40 second runs, and then you have like 10 or 15 minutes between your next run for your brakes to cool down, a big brake kit isn't going to really benefit you too much. I'm not going to pretend like you won't see any benefit from it, but the return versus the amount of money you're spending is going to be massively diminishing. When people think about cars like the Lamborghini Huracan Performante, the 911 GT3 RS or the GT2 RS, a lot of people get really wrapped up thinking about the aero and the horsepower and the PDK transmissions that the GT3 and GT2 RS has, and those are great, but honestly, one of the most impressive things about those cars is their brakes. The fact that those carbon ceramic brakes can take that kind of abuse for such extended periods of time on a road car is a really, really, really impressive thing. And so that's where the size and that's really where the compound and the composition comes in. Obviously, everyone's heard of carbon ceramic brakes. The reason that they're ideal, especially the carbon ceramic discs, is because they manage heat really, really well. So they can load a lot of thermal energy really quickly, but then they can disperse that energy really quickly as well. So with steel brakes, it takes them a little bit longer to let that energy go as radiant heat, whereas the carbon ceramic brakes tend to cool down and heat up really, really quickly. It's part of what makes them so expensive. I know that everyone wants to hear that this is like this transformative modification that you can do to your car for very little money, but in reality, it's not going to be that transformative, especially if you just drive your car on the street, and it's not even that cheap in the grand scheme of things. Like, the calipers themselves are cheap. They're about $150 a piece, and that's partially because they're still in active production. They're an OE part that you can get on Amazon, which is absolutely fantastic. But by the time you add everything up, the calipers themselves, the discs, the pads, the brake lines, the hardware, all that stuff that goes with it, and then if you want to paint them to match your car, because I don't know about you guys, I didn't want the Cadillac logo on my calipers, that's just even more money. So by the time you add all that up, it's not exactly a cheap mod. You're looking at somewhere in the ballpark of $1,100 to $1,200, which is not bad by any stretch of the imagination for a brake upgrade. But if it's an upgrade that you're not going to see that much benefit from, there's so many other places that you could spend $1,200 and actually feel a real difference. once again, I know that's not what everyone wants to hear, but at the end of the day, there's no such thing as bad information, just information we don't like. Now, one mod that will make a pretty significant and measurable difference, and I promised I would talk about, is the cooling ducts that I installed 2 videos ago. I kept my coolant temperature gauge up for the entirety of this drive, partially because I wanted to keep an eye on it myself, but also so you guys could see that throughout the entire duration of this drive, my temperature stayed super static. They hovered between about 194 to 197 degrees and really didn't budge past that. Now, that one I'm not seeing a real big difference in because I had already converted my car to being a front breather previously. This was more of just a refinement to that design, and so it's not making a massive difference on my car. However, it will make a pretty significant difference on your car. One reason that I know it'll actually make a difference for you guys is because it actually addresses one of the biggest inherent flaws of the bottom breather design, and that is that when you're driving, whether you're on a track or on the road, by nature of being a bottom breather, it's pulling up the hottest possible air and trying to use it for cooling. The air that is directly above the road surface or the track surface is always going to have the highest temperature of all of the air available. So by simply pulling the air from a little bit higher up, that's going to make a difference because the air that's actually going to your radiator is cooler than the air that was going to it before. It's not going to be by a big difference, but when you're dealing with this kind of thing, every bit of difference does help. And on that note, I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to shut up, and I'm just going to let you guys enjoy the sound of my mic'd up exhaust and this POV drive. Well, apparently the video doesn't end there. Immediately after closing the video out, I learned a very powerful lesson, and that is don't trust the factory thread locker. Let me show you what happened. So while I was on the highway, just as I was getting ready to exit here, I heard a really concerning sound. So I exited, and before I had an opportunity to pull into one of the parking lots over there, I got to the intersection and my front left locked all the way up, and it looks like even though I absolutely double checked, the caliper bolts backed out, at least one of them, the one on the bottom, and shifted back and just absolutely destroyed my wheel on the inside and locked up the front. So I ended up coming to a very terrifying and unceremonious stop at that intersection over there. So yeah, gonna have to do some repair work. All I can say is thank absolute God that that didn't happen 20 minutes ago while I was doing my spirited drive. If it had happened then, it's very, very probable that this would have went from a damaged caliper, damaged wheel situation to a life-altering crash. Let me put it that way. And on that miserable note, I'm going to, I guess, sit here, wait for my dad. He's gonna come grab me. We're gonna go get the jack, grab another caliper bolt, and come back, get this thing limped home. The bright side, while I do it, I guess I can enjoy this this nice sunset. So on that miserable note, thank you guys so much for watching. Drive safe, throw your car batteries in the ocean, and guess we know what the next video is going to be about. Bye.